The sort of thrust of this whole session this afternoon is around decarbonisation, and we're looking at some of the things that drive the outcomes of success in terms of decarbonisation. So obviously we've heard from Adam about rail, and then we've got Stephen Fiddler later talking about buses. I think that for me, it's been really interesting to hear some of the challenges that Adam was talking around some of those complex systems in rail. And I think if the rail industry are facing complex systems and struggling to understand how to achieve them, I think it's probably a drop in the ocean when you consider the wider transport network and the complexity of integration around there. So looking towards decarbonisation specifically and some of the opportunities that transport technology might play, I guess I'm going to start with you, Alice. Do you want to just give us your views on how transport technology can support the decarbonisation agenda?
Yeah, sure. Should I start with an intro on Lime
Yes,
as well?
please, yes.
Because I think we may be well known to people in the room and then also maybe really well not well known. So I am a Public Affairs Manager at Lime. For those who do not know what Lime is a world-leading micromobility provider. We're in 280 cities worldwide, and we operate shared e-bikes and shared e-scooters. So we operate in e-bikes in cities like London, Milton Keynes, Oxford, Nottingham, and e-scooters in Salford and Great Manchester, but also Milton Keynes and London. And our aim is to really get a future of transport that is shared, affordable, carbon-free. Micromobility is an area where there is plenty of opportunity and a really good intersection of data, technology, and decarbonisation. I think going forward, there's plenty more that we can be doing, but I think it's a very, very fast-moving area. So 1/3 of our journeys in London are to and from public transport. We delivered 60 million commuter journeys last year in London on our e-bike service. So that just shows the scale that potentially we could have, and we are having, and how we bring this to other cities across the UK and unlocking that growth is going to be really critical for decarbonising transport.
Thank you. Eugenia?
Yeah, just a brief introduction on Campaign for Better Transport. So we are a UK charity that advocates for better transport. As you probably have guessed from my title as Corporate Partnerships Manager, I don't do these panels often, so my policy and research team have put something together for me. Just a disclaimer, if you have any specific questions on anything I say or anything about pay as you drive, which is the topic I'm covering today, to tackle decarbonisation, please email them to me and I can share them with the team, unless I have my details here with me. So today I'm going to be talking about decarbonisation and how we stand on this, particularly how pay as you drive can support a better system, discouraging people from driving, especially as you were saying, for like shorter journeys. How can micromobility be integrated into this, and how can we discourage people from driving so much? So my team has been doing some research on this new sort of tax called pay as you drive, that would replace the road tax and help the government cover up the hole that has been left after people have switched to EVs and then have not paid for fuel duty for a few years. But the idea is that technology can help us change how we use transport, in a sense that we can fix fares by making public transport more accessible and easier to use, with real-time data and smart ticketing. So encouraging people to use buses, trains, micromobility, DRT in rural areas, and improving how this happens, but also discouraging people from using their private car.
Okay, thank you. Keith?
So maybe I should introduce myself. Keith McCabe, CEO of Simplifai Systems. Simplifai Systems is an AI company based in the north of England that has deployments across the north of England and is now looking to license its patented technology to the rest of the world. I don't want to talk about that for the moment. Actually, my other role is as the ITS UK Carbon Ambassador. And I think it's important to start by making the point that ITS currently reduces carbon emissions in the UK. And the existing systems that are deployed, if they were all switched off, would probably increase emissions by about 25%. all of those traffic lights, all of those payment systems, all of those other information and control systems, including rail operating systems, you switch them all off, the country ceases to function, it's gridlock everywhere, and emissions go through the roof. Now, the problem we've had as an industry is we don't know how to shout about that. And we haven't become an area of focus for decarbonisation. But going forward, that's going to be our challenge. Because you look at the 7th carbon budget that was published last week, the major shift and the major reduction in emissions is from surface transport. And it's through electrification. And, you know, I'm a bit of an expert in AI, but it doesn't take anyone to notice that if you electrify the whole of the vehicle fleet, you then end up with batteries that have a storage capacity more than the output of the national grid, and you have a national grid that has greater demands on it. They need to be linked together. And AI systems come into play, but all of the stuff that as an ITS industry we're really good at, which is bringing together complex, disparate data sets, turning them into something useful, actually the challenge over the next 15 years is set up for us. And that's where I think we should focus on going forward, is to make sure that over the next 15 years, we don't just talk about it as a target, we're actually involved front and centre in the delivery. Because if we're there, then it'd be obvious to everyone why ITS is an important sector.
Thank you. Mark?
Thank you. So, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. The question, how can technology support a cleaner and greener network? So it's such a simple, easy question, but it's around a very ridiculously complex area. I've reflected on the question a couple of days ago and thought, you know, where is the complexity? Where are the challenges? And the network is a system. It's a system of systems. It's connected with other transportation networks or systems of systems, connected with energy systems of systems. There's huge complexity there. The change that's happening in this system of system is happening at different levels. You have hardware technology sat on the roadside that's been there for decades, whereas the data that's flowing out of it is flowing, the systems that control or consume that data may be changing very quickly. So there's different levels of change. The actors in the system are changing. So when Davin was on earlier talking about the B2C business model, that's changed, it's opened up, it's become more networked, it's less linear, less siloed, and it's B2B to C. So the actors in there, and also the citizens are becoming more connected. The various sensors in the network becoming wider spread. So there's a wider level of actors in the network, and innovation that's coming through. Some of that innovation is radical. Some of it's incremental. So if you look at through, so that's I kind of mulled those ideas and talked about the outputs and how we can really reduce carbon emissions, particulates, reduce noises. This could be cleaner and greener. And I thought, how could I look at this through the lens, or what lenses could I use to look at this through? So you could look at it through the technology lens, and I've been a bit naughty, and I make no apologies for this, but I'm not just going to talk about hardware. I'm going to talk about the data that flows out of the hardware and the systems that are associated to that. You could look at it through the asset life cycles lens. So I come from Mott MacDonald, from a division of 700 people who look at the full asset life cycle of the highways, through behavioural scientists, builders, designers, software engineers. So I'm going to look at it for the full asset life cycle. And then, it's fundamentally a supply and demand system. So looking at it from sort of the side of demand, with the vehicles trying to get out on the network, supply in terms of the infrastructure, whether it's physical or digital infrastructure, and then the systems that glue those together that match the supply and demand. So I could talk for hours on this. I'll give you one example on each of those: supply, demand, and glues, and then an example of where Mott's are delivering, but happy to talk for ages. If you look in the demand space, EVs, so the replacement of internal combustion engines with electric vehicles or hydrogen vehicles or whatever. The market's been primed by government subsidies. The demand is dropping off, and part of the reason is the infrastructure is slow to respond. It's not being built out. So support in building the infrastructure out will accelerate the diffusion and adoption of EVs, which will then reduce carbon emissions, at least scope 1 carbon emissions, and noise pollution as well, potentially. So that's in the demand side. If you look at the supply side, where to start? There's loads of examples, but the one that sticks out is there's silos. Everybody mentions this: silos of data, silos of systems. If we can help organisations take the tsunami of data that's out there, help integrate it, help derive insights, I think that's a really good starting point for helping to improve asset management techniques, for example. And we're doing some great work with National Highways to look at the operational technology assets and dashboard from various different silos, the sort of mean time to failure for certain different types of operational technology assets. And then lastly, the kind of glue that sits between that supply and demand. There are a number of systems out there that help, again, integrate data from various sources and manage and control data flows in urban areas. So a variety of different tools out there, but UTMCs, Urban Traffic Management Control Systems, of which McDonald has one called Osprey. It's fantastic. More than welcome to buy one. Those systems are out there, and we're doing some really good work with the Combined Authority up in the northeast, NECA, where they're using our UTMC. They're also taking in positional data from buses. We've already done some trials, and using our UTMC to influence the bus routes and give priority to buses within urban areas controlling UTCs. A whole stack of challenges there. The one thing I did reflect on after this was, actually, it's not all about technology. It's about people. It's about people who are implementing the change, understanding that what needs to be done, and also making sure that change is beneficial for the end user, for people. So it's not just about technology, whether it's hardware, data, or systems. It's about the people as well. I'll shut up there.
Thank you, Mark.
Don't say anything. I can talk more than you. So I'm just bearing you out. If you need to stop me, feel free. So I'm Heather Foster. I work at Midlands Connect. So for those that don't know, there are 7 subnational transport bodies throughout England, and I look after the Midlands region. So kind of just to lean on that kind of discussion that everybody's had, I think the key thing that we see is that we need to make sure that integrated systems have the data they need for the customer journey. I think we need the vision of what we need to do to decarbonise. And of course, one of those that always crops up is EV is the quickest route to that decarbonisation. However, it cannot be done in isolation. It needs to be done together. Local energy area plans, local transport plans, it all has to kind of work together. So what I'll probably be going through is a little bit with the work that I've been doing in electric vehicles across the Midlands region, where we've actually been able to get 13 partners together and actually understand, those kind of capability aspects, the knowledge, the understanding. We talked this morning about data and how councils don't necessarily have a person in there. Some of the challenges around, should it be free and open data? But ultimately, we need a system that's going to give the vision for a person to be able to go, you know what, today, I actually want to go on a bus if I live in an urban area. If I live in a rural area, maybe I have challenges around that. There could be demand transport routes. I think the main thing we need to be careful of is efficiently using our resources. Cars only pretty much get used about 4-ish% of the time. They mainly sit there. So we need to look at, can we share journeys? There's quite a few examples where there's actually quite a lot of people that are elderly with cars, and actually they're lonely, and people have been sharing those cars and being able to help with, getting people out. A lot of people that aren't able to afford cars can't get to their NHS appointments, and then therefore they're failing on the NHS. So actually there's a lot of untangible benefits, but actually could really economically help, build back that kind of integrated way of working. I'm Nottingham born and bred. I didn't actually see any point having a car when I was growing up. Only when I moved to the rural areas, I saw the kind of disparities between the transport systems. So I think really ultimately this is it's an integrated web, as you said, of complexities, but it's one, having the data that we need to make the decisions that we need, that actually makes us work towards the energy systems that you said that needs to make sure that we can use those resources effectively, because we don't want to be sitting in 2 to 3 hours of traffic every week. You know, it's not really going to work for us that way. But how do we move people to that vision that makes them want to make that change? And it is quite difficult, you know, telling everybody, you know, you should go on a bus, but giving them the option that feels that actually the bus is quicker than a car. So I'll probably leave it there, but I know we'll go into a bit more about each one of our parts. But I think basically our panel is very much that we're all together on this journey.
Yeah. Thanks, Heather. You've just pretty much summarised the answer to the next question,
Oh,
so
sorry.
I'll quickly pivot away from the question I was going to ask. Thank you for all of that. I think I took away a couple of things from everything you said. I think, Keith, what's interesting in what you just talked about is there's a lot of positivity in where we've been and where we're going. And I think for us as a sector and as an industry, I think it's about us almost turning the screw a little bit and seeing what else we can get out, what are the other benefits we can drive, and making sure that the benefits that ITS can bring as an industry are targeted in the right places, I suppose. And again, you know, Alice, you come from an area of the world in terms of the micromobility, which I think has seen a huge success over the last few years, and you know, it's brilliant to see that, and brilliant to see that kind of little snapshot of where things are going well. So I guess what I would be interested to understand is if we took a step back, a bit like Heather was just saying, we took a step back and we looked at what our vision might be in, say, 2050 from an integrated transport driving a decarbonisation agenda, what might that utopia look like?
Start with me?
Yeah.
I mean, utopia is a big word, but I think micromobility in at least every city should be the minimum for us. I mean, in the UK right now, we have some shared e-bike schemes, some shared bike schemes, but they're maybe more infrequent than potentially they could be, looking at other European countries as well. We still don't have any national micromobility framework, and the e-scooter schemes are still in national trials. And by the end, they've been further extended for another 2 years, which means that by the end, it will have been a 6-year trial. I don't know if anyone's ever experienced a trial longer than that. And the thing that's very frustrating for the e-scooter side is that those are limited to set trial areas, so no new trial areas are allowed. And then also, when we want to make decisions as a business, in terms of like, or as a local authority, if a local authority wants more fleet, if they want to change what the zone looks like, if they want to do any decisions, it has to go through national government currently. That makes it very hard as a business because there's no certainty, but it also makes it really hard for local authorities to therefore design the transport plans that they want. And it doesn't give, like I said, how can micromobility grow when there's that lack of certainty and lack of space for innovation? And I think if you compare maybe even the growth of some of the shared mobility in terms of e-bikes and bikes to scooters, you can see where there's plenty of missed opportunities. So I think for me, getting to a point where we have a national framework, micromobility has grown and is seen as a viable transport option is obviously a huge thing. And then a bit of a cheeky request is that as a Mancunian, we have a scooter scheme in Salford, but it currently can't, due to DFT regulation, go beyond Salford. So I would love to have an e-scooter scheme that went across the whole of Manchester.
Anyone else want to pick up that? Heather, do you want to?
Yeah, well,
Awesome.
I think I've got a vision that it would be that we can all move to the transport systems that enable us to do that. I think it's you want to make it synergetic, if that makes a word. I've probably made up a word, I do apologise. But I think it's making it easy for people to pick the right transport route for them. And I think that ultimately is how do we, going on that discussion about local authorities, how do you enable them to come to that decision together? And I think that kind of was a very big driven discussion this morning, actually, about how do you get the stakeholders together? And that kind of brought up in GBRX as well. So I think given what I've been seeing with the work that we've been doing in the electric vehicle and trying to look at infrastructure is how do you enable the authorities to have that confidence when maybe the national policy, it does support it, but it needs to give them that kind of more of a feel that they can make the decisions in their areas that they need. Because as you said, there's not one size fits all. I have no authority in my Midlands area that is exactly the same. They might be exactly the same in their geographic area, but they have a completely different income. So where maybe the economic model works really well in the West Midlands, it doesn't necessarily work in the furthest parts of some of my seaside resorts in my area. So I think the vision that I want to be able to see is to give the authorities that feel that they can make that decision without having to feel that they've done something wrong, if that makes sense. So that they can go, well, for my area, this fits me, and I appreciate my next door neighbour might do it that way. But their transport system is so different. And I'm guessing me living from Nottinghamshire, where I could get from one end of the authority to the other, I now moved to Derbyshire and realise how hard it is for me to get around. Because my first journey for work was 3 hours 10 on 2 buses to get to work, or 30 minutes in a car. So it showed me how different it was, where in Nottingham I could get from one end to the other, either by tram or by bus, and I never ever thought of using a car. So I think it's being able to be aware that national policy can only do so much. It enables you, but I think it's giving that kind of freedom that, you know, the vision has to be led by the authority. It also has to go across borders. A lot of people travel, most of the journeys in a car, over 10 miles, is usually across border. So whoever lives in Nottinghamshire will be going to Derbyshire, or Derbyshire will be going to Staffordshire, or Staffordshire in. So we've got to be very careful that it's not too siloed either. So the vision is, you know, that's where subnational transport bodies can really make that difference, because we are independent. We are there to help people travel. Midlands, let's be honest, you can't get to Scotland, you can't get to Wales, you can't get to Wales. You've got to travel through the Midlands. So as much as we've got to sort out place, we do also need to sort out transport, rail links, you know, not just cars, HGVs. You've got kind of a wide need of where does the necessary fit for the energy systems, as kind of was discussed, but also where can we use that resources. So I think for me, it's having that, and I probably waffled way too much, but I think it's very much data, make the customer journey work for you, but also have the tools that the authorities need to work together so they can all share and not feel that they've made something wrong, because there will be slight hiccups as we go down this road. It's not to kind of throw them under the bus with it, it's to go that actually it didn't work, but in here it could work, and for this area maybe pay-as-you-go works, and it might be that using a scooter in works better than a bus, but actually it's how do we kind of make that a very easy, flowable journey with the energy systems and the transport plans to back that up, to meet that 2050 vision, so people can work with us to get to that point. Keith?
I think there's some things that need to be expanded on a bit more, which is when we start to mention data, we have to understand that over the next 15 years, the 2 biggest areas where the use of electricity will expand, one is surface transport, the other one is data centres. And the amount of energy that's needed for data centres in the UK is growing exponentially. So what we've got to think is, if we're going to join the 2 together, we've got to think of the hows and the whys. And the thing that really needs to get into the mindset of policymakers and into our industry is that transport is the consequence of the human activities, and it can act as a blocker or an enabler. But the data gives us an insight into why people are travelling. And if we can incorporate why people are travelling into how we manage that travel or how we manage the goods, we can then make really effective use of data. And I know from the limited stuff that we've done as a company, where rather than going into absolute detail of what's the flow here or what's the flow there, you go and consult a Sky listing on when are the football matches going to happen, or you consult the weather on who's going to go to the coast when. You get a much better insight in how to manage the road network. But there's a reluctance at the moment to use those much better insights into how things are moving around, and always going back to, oh, it must be insular, it must be this detection, and it must be that. Because I know as a company, we've invented the bare bones of in-vehicle signalling for cars on roads and the methodology for doing it. But I think it was really insightful listening to the rail network presentation just now. It's within the road industry, we need to have a roadmap equally of how you get there and how we join the data centres, the energy networks, the vehicles, and manage freight and the movement of people. And if we can do that and think of reducing carbon at the same time, we're then with a chance of delivering targets. But it is changing the way we think as well as lots of technology stuff as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Probably just to add to that, I think there is also that short-term and long-term vision as well. What can we do short-term that does decarbonise us? Because we appreciate that if we don't decarbonise, we're looking at scenarios that are a lot higher in terms of temperature and changes that we're going to have, resilience on the road and all that kind of impact. So we do appreciate that whilst our visions are kind of 2050, there are going to have to be some short-term visions. And that's why electric vehicles is going to have to lead that way in order to get us there. But it's how do we do it effectively in one way. So I think that's the thing where it's really hard because we're going to be talking about things that are kind of where we want it to be. But we also need to look at that kind of immediate thing of how do we make that decision now than talking about it in 5 years and wishing that we had done it. So I think there's a lot of really hardcore decisions that are going to have to be done to make that a reality. And I think that's where it's that 2030, 2040, 2050. But appreciating that people are going to have to come on this journey and the key things that you've said.
It's a really interesting point there, because I can see technology can step in to kind of help bridge where there are challenges in adoption. So if you look at EVs, the market was pump primed with money. EVs started, the adoption of EVs started to grow. It's leveled off, and that's partly down to not range anxiety, but recharging anxiety.
Yeah.
The infrastructure is organically growing, shall we say, a rate
It's
of...
definitely going to build.
Yeah, it's definitely going to build. Yeah, absolutely. If it doesn't, what do we do? There are opportunities for technology to step in, and maybe there are peer-to-peer charging networks that could evolve, which are private sector. They allow peer-to-peer charging, and people who are fortunate enough to have a garden, have a driveway, have a charging unit.
I do it on a terrace street. They can use my driveway,
Absolutely.
and they can borrow my car.
Yeah. So the private sector could step in, help implement that. It will need regulation, it will need technology, it will need people to do it, but it'll help bridge the gap. So I absolutely agree. There's stuff that can happen in the short term, and this goes back to the question around innovation. Will there be one big kind of silver bullet, big radical innovation that just steps us to net zero by 2050? No, there won't. It has to be incremental innovation driven from across the sector.
It's changing as we're going along. Let's think what an EV was 5 years ago to what it is now.
Thank you. We could carry on for
Sorry.
a lot longer. No, I'm just aware. Have we got any questions in the audience? We've got our roving mics. No questions? Oh, yeah, someone over there. Okay.
Hi. A question to Eugenia, if you can tell us more about the pay per road use, pay per drive.
Yeah,
What?
pay as you drive. So it's a system that would charge users based on how much they use the road. So it's instead of road tax, I think we call it now, which is like a flat fee per year. It depends on how polluting your car is, on how big your car is. But EVs don't pay that, or they have been exempt for a long time. And the idea behind that was to encourage people to buy electric vehicles in order to reduce emissions. But the fact is that this hasn't quite done the trick. We still need less vehicles on the road. So in order to sort of disincentivize people from driving, we have to add a kind of tax, apart from the fact that we're missing money from fuel duty and these other tax. We need to tax EVs because they are still using the roads, and we have to figure out how to do that. And one of the ways is by using, so these vehicles have a telematics system already built in them, so we can track in a legal way how they move and how much they move and where they move. So there should be a tax which might be coming into place, and it would tax each vehicle according to how much they drive and where they drive. So obviously in rural areas it wouldn't be fair because there's not as good services for public transport. But in cities, there's going to be a tax for that. Does that answer the question?
Though something should be added to that, though, because obviously the technology works because there's been a lot of trials in the US where it's been successfully implemented. But it's noticeable in the Climate Change Committee's 7th budget. They make the case that people will buy EVs because they're cheaper, and the difference between the two is the lack of paying fuel duty.
Yep.
So they're saying in 2040, EVs will still not pay any fuel duty and as a consequence won't pay any mileage-based tax, which I think is a weakness in the reports because, as you say, there's these wider issues that need to be looked at. But I think as the government policy stands and the Climate Change Committee stands, is there are no plans to implement it in the UK for at least the next 15 years. So that's, you know, the two things have to be square because the technology's there, it works.
Yeah.
I know lots of people who've been involved in the trials in the US that are now being, you know, widely rolled out in a number of states.
Yeah. Road user charging for any reason is obviously a very politically hot potato, so it's right. Any more questions? There's a question over there.
David Redgeworth from the South West of England on a number of government regional bodies. So what I'm trying to ask is, we've yet to get an integrated ticket. We might in Manchester for the B network, but if you come to the South West, there's very few tickets you can get on an app that will let you go on a bus, a train, an Uber, a National Express coach. We don't seem to have a system of actually being able to purchase multimodal journeys in the English regions. And with the integrated transport white paper, we've now got Pastrap, which obviously I'm involved with for cross-country trains, but which is on the National Rail Network. But we don't seem to have a joined-up app, even though the policy and the consultation, which finished a few weeks ago, doesn't exactly yet. You can't just go to, I suppose, Derby, if you like, in the East Midlands from, say, Barnstaple, and be able to buy yourself a ticket that takes you on an app, one train, and two buses, similarly on a National Express coach from Cheltenham.
Integrated ticketing.
Can I take that one? Yeah, because you might have seen recently the brokering system is out. So there's a trial going on along basically the East to West Midlands route that will be doing a trial. So it'll be the Nottingham bus companies, the trains, but it will go across Derbyshire. So effectively it's that kind of TfL type aspect across. Of course, it's been something the STBs have been very keen on across England, if that makes sense. So I think now it's trying to prove that that kind of model works across to then see how that can be moved. But I would basically say watch this space. You're kind of in that middle zone of it's not there yet, but it's made quite a dramatic step this year. So, but so I can't say too much about it because it's actually out at procurement at the moment.
Yeah.
I think, though, there's a fundamental weakness in the way we do transport business cases, which hasn't driven the integrated ticketing forward. Because, again, if you look at the data, which is available elsewhere, is if you include in the journey time the amount of time it takes to purchase a ticket, the amount of uncertainty caused around how you would purchase tickets, and then when you look at journey times, you don't just look at the journey time of the vehicles going along the corridor, you look at how long it takes to get there and then purchase the tickets and everything. If that was taken into account, that more money would go towards the integrated ticketing, because it should do. It's just a real weakness in the way we calculate improvements in travel and improvements in journey time.
Absolutely, and I don't know if you heard Andy Burnham's keynote speech this morning in the main stage. That's exactly the point that Andy was making about the way in which we measure transport, the benefits that transport improvements bring us. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there because the time is really tight. Thank you to everyone on the panel. I think, again, we always say it, but we could have carried on talking for a long time and it would have been equally fascinating. So round of applause, please, for everyone on the panel.